OK, thanks, Steve. So that was RT's Easter Rally there, live from London. Well, we can talk about the story a bit further too, because we're now joined by Gearóid Ó Colmáin, independent political analyst, who's going to give us his views on everything that we've just talked about there. Gearóid, good to have you on RT this evening. Did you see this as an issue of freedom of speech, or do you see this as something that really has gone beyond the pale?
First of all, freedom of speech, as it is interpreted in Europe, seems to mean freedom to insult victims of war and victims of aggression. And this is another very disgusting example of that we've seen here. This is an absolute disgrace. It is, I think, unsurprising that the name of the journal was Vive Charlie. It's a clear reference to Charlie Hebdo, which specializes and has always specialized in mocking the underdog, mocking the victim, mocking the poor, mocking Muslim immigrants, etc., etc. And I think we saw another example of this after the shooting down of the Russian plane in Egypt last year, where again Charlie Hebdo mocked the victims, found it very funny. This is, I think, a deep reflection of the moral turpitude of the ruling establishment in Europe, the media being a key component of the ruling establishment. Editors of journals are badly educated thugs. They don't understand anything about cultural difference. They use anything they can find to sell magazines and sell newspapers. And of course, this is another very sinister example of that.
Gearóid, can I just pick you up on that? Is it, I mean, are you talking about sort of a minority of publications, or is your belief that the majority are actually sort of culpable here?
I would say the majority. You only have to see the kind of the way in which they use children, for example, the murder of children by Western-backed terrorists to sell the war on Syria by claiming that Assad is doing the killing, when in fact it is Western-backed terrorists who are doing the killing. And I should say that the kind of killing they have been doing in Syria, it has involved beheading children, it has involved crucifying children, they have murdered children en masse, and they've used it in very often. They've used that as propaganda against the Syrian government, who is protecting its people from a terrorist onslaught supported by the West. And I think this is another very sinister example of using children, abusing children. Of course, it's using. I think that we could say that it is another example of the demonization of Russia by mocking any kind of the suffering of the Russian people, mocking the suffering of the family who lost that child, mocking that child itself. It's a sinister example.
Gearóid, sorry, just to jump in here, how can you actually draw the line? Because we always hear the argument, don't we, it's freedom of speech, and then obviously people and large numbers of people are offended by what's happened, but how do you take this forward? How do you prevent this from happening again unless you actually remove the freedom of speech? What's the argument?
Well, we don't have freedom of speech anyway in Western Europe. We don't have freedom of speech. There are events in history we're not allowed to question. There are countries, you'd be very careful, and if you criticize them, you never hear any criticism of the United States and Israel, no real substantive criticism anyway in the Western press, which is the reason why we have to go to other countries if we want to actually have a real debate. So there is no freedom of expression anyway, but there is freedom of expression if it involves this kind of gutter press, this kind of evil mockery of people suffering, and particularly when that country is the designated enemy, and in this case the designated enemy is Russia, so that the mockery of that child's death and of that child's family is part of the dehumanization of Russia. It's okay to have a laugh when a Russian plane is downed in Egypt. It's okay to have a laugh when it's a Russian child who has been killed. And of course, they also want to spread Islamophobia with this. Let us not forget that this woman does not seem to be in her right mind. She's obviously schizophrenic, but I think that it's perhaps not such a coincidence that this has happened, given the fact that the real child killers are now moving into Central Asia. Uzbekistan is a country that could be targeted and has been targeted by Islamic terrorism in 2007. And so there is something deeply evil about this, and as I said already, it is a reflection of the kind of gutter, mentality of the ruling media and political establishment in the West. They are child killers, child abusers, and this is just another very poignant example of that.
Gearóid, we have to leave it there, but thank you for giving us your opinion on this story. That was Gearóid Ó Colmáin, independent political analyst. Thank you.